And now it's time for Mob Talk Radio with your host, Jeff Canarsie.
This is going to be probably a 4 or 5 part series about the waterfront, and it's just going to give you an inside look at how the waterfront works, the players involved, history stuff, not a little current stuff, but we're going to get through as many pages as we can, and I'm going to try to basically give you a dissertation on how the waterfront works, and how labor racketeering works, because we talk about it all the time, but I don't think a lot of people really know what it is. And I'm going to hope to dummy it down for enough of you so that we can understand that. And so when we think in terms of labor racketeering, especially racketeers in general, I don't think people understand how complicated it isn't, but yet at the same time, how sophisticated it is. It's not just a simple, we run the docks and that's all there is to it. There is so much that's involved that I think it's going to blow your mind. So the goal for the next hour is to try to not kill you with a ton of jargon and a ton of storylines. I just want you to understand what this is. And then once we get to next week, we're really going to start talking about some people. But I'm going to go ahead and get started just because I want to get to some people if we can. But just for layman's terms, for people that don't understand this, this is why I'm doing it this way. It does me no good to talk about certain instances, especially when some people may not understand how this began. It does me no good to talk about what happened during World War II when the government and the Navy went to the mob and said, can you please protect the waterfront? There's a reason why they did that, but it does me no good to tell you, well, this is what they did and why, but how and why were they there to begin with? So labor racketeering has always sort of been characterized in so many ways, like a cancer that almost destroyed the labor movement. This is what a former attorney general used to say about these things. And let's just be honest, the Mafia has run the docks. They have forever. And I don't think that's ever going to change. In fact, right now you see Newark, the Port of Newark and the Port of New York is fighting with each other. They're threatening to sue each other over the docks. That's how bad this stuff has gotten. But basically everything that I'm going to give you came from a Senate committee report. Now, does that mean that everything contained in this is 100% accurate? No, absolutely not. But I think it gives enough information, and there's enough credible information as far as I'm concerned. Keep in mind, this is 1,000 pages, and I went through all 1,000 pages 3 times. So there's just a lot of material to go through. So like I said, we are going to dive right the fuck in. Some of it's going to be long-winded because there's a lot of paperwork that I sort of got to sift through as we're doing this. And like I said, this is coming from a lot of different Senate reports. And so some of the stuff that we're going to cover in this first portion anyway isn't going to be all that exciting. But like I said, there's a excuse me, coffee. There's a reason why I'm doing it the way that we're doing it. But there are big 4. What the government calls the big 4 unions: the International Longshoremen's Association, the Hotel Employees and Restaurant Employees International Union, the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, the Labor International Union in North America, and the independent unions. These are the unions that the government, albeit claims, are completely controlled by organized crime. And, you know, we're also throughout when we do this going to cover construction, meat distribution, New York industries, everything. There's an ebb and flow to everything. The commission that did this report analyzed multiple New York City industries, like I said, meat distribution, construction, and each which manifests different signs of influence of organized crime. The report that I do have, like I said, it's like 1,000 pages, something like that. It talks about a lot of different players and a lot of different people. And one of the things that I found unique was, once again, we're going to find that the stupid shit that Joe Bonanno said was used in this report. He talked about them controlling unions and pretty much gave a breakdown and a rundown in his book of how this operated. Now, we've talked a lot about on this show, Joe Bonanno and his big fucking mouth. Why on earth he felt talking about unions in a book was, it just kind of blows my mind. And like I said, I think the reason why he did was he's a very bitter guy. But if he had just played his fucking cards and just kept in line, he would have outlived all of them. He would have outlived every single mob boss. But that just wasn't in the cards for Joe Bonanno because he just wanted to sort of control everything. So, for example, the Westies, a lot of people may not know this, but they were one of the successors of the successful groups in contrast to early Irish gangs which came to the city. And they controlled unions themselves on Manhattan's West Side. So a lot of people think that when you think about unions and docks, well, the Colombos own this, the Bonannos own this, the Gambinos got that. But it's really a lot more laid out than you would ever think it would be. So like in Brooklyn, the Genovese crime family might have this in Brooklyn, but then further north in Brooklyn, you might have the Gambinos running that. So a lot of people, I think, have the understanding that if one crime family has that territory, that all the docks in that territory are theirs. And that's not the way or the case that it is. The way that everything is spread out is pretty incredible. And we probably won't get to it today, but there's actually some stuff in this that break down who controls what. Let's see. They mention Ray Patriarca as being a major influence in the 1960s, exerting almost complete control over unions in Boston. Not only in Boston, but in other areas as well. This sort of report that we have is really going to focus more on the abilities that the mob has had to control things. And right here, it quotes Joe Bonanno, a former boss of La Cosa Nostra, has pointed out repeatedly that organized crime and La Cosa Nostra are synonymous terms, fully defining the extent of organized crime while excluding all other manifestations of the phenomenon. Meaning that Joe Bonanno basically said the Mafia and La Cosa Nostra are the same exact thing. Why he felt the need to do that, I don't know. And they have a quote from him here. Most Americans still believe that the Mafia controls all of organized crime in America. This is a fantasy. The Kafafar Committee assumed that the Mafia was a monolithic organization that controlled organized crime in America. Such a body, as defined by the committee, does not exist. Organized crime embraces a lot of people, not just Sicilians, but Jews, Irish, Puerto Ricans, Cubans, blacks, white people. I don't know why they said Anglos. You name it, to the point that these various groups are controlled by one agency is preposterous. So basically, Joe Bonanno's laying it out to this commission that the Italian organized crime doesn't control what the Puerto Ricans do. They do their own kind of thing. They don't control what the African-American culture does. In some ways, that's very accurate, but in some ways, it all also depends on the time period that you're actually talking about. Labor leaders, front men, were known as earners back in the day. The view of organized crime comports with that of the 1930s Lucky Luciano, who saw his alliances with those outside of the Mafia as purely business, to be thought of collectively as the outfit or the syndicate. More recently, and this was, keep in mind, this is in the 80s, Angelo Leonardo, the former underboss of the Cleveland crime family, described the role of Milton Cigar Man Rockman, who acted as a conduit for money skimmed from Las Vegas casinos by several Midwest Mafia members, which echoed what Luciano and Bonanno had said at one point. We all belong to the organization. Rockman always took care of the labor movement and the financial movement. He belonged to the same organization, but not, he wasn't a member of the family. To be a member of the family, you have to be Italian. So this is sort of talking about, I'm trying to think about what the right term for these people are, but it's like Lou Wasserman, Sidney Korshak. They're players. Roy Cohn. These are people that are maybe lawyers, maybe professional people, entrepreneurs, or whatever, but they're used in a very specific area for organized crime because they are essentially, albeit at least publicly, clean. And they will use those people to help them do things. And that's the way the mafia has always kind of functioned. Paul Castellano was probably the most sophisticated of all of the crime bosses. He thought of himself more as a businessman than a hood. We've talked about that. Obviously, we know that Paul Castellano got killed, but he was caught on wiretap saying our job is to run the unions. And it just shows that union proliferation is at the core of organized crime. And so one of the questions that we often talk about today is does organized crime still control unions? In many ways, we just saw how many Colombos got arrested last year for running unions for the last 30 years. That's never going to change. And the second that changes and they cannot control those unions anymore, what you're going to see is a mass exodus of drugs and murder, because unions, and you're going to find out just how much money we're talking about as far as unions go. Unions are really where a lot of the money comes from. But I do think that the second you lose unions, you lose power, you lose political affluence, you lose all of that. And that's one of the major differences between today and, say, the 1960s, 50s, and 40s, which we talk about throughout the history. In the old days, they controlled everything. Is that still the case today? In some forms, yes. So when people do make arguments that they say, organized crime today isn't the same, you're right, it's not the same, but it's not dead either. Everything evolves. And when things begin to evolve, they always sort of relegate and go back to the past. So is that to say that 20 years from now, the mob will be completely out of unions? No, I think you're going to see a regression back to the old days. You're going to eventually get a boss. In some crime family, they're just going to have insanely old world values. Even if they're young today, let's say they're 10 years old today or 15 years old today. Just because society changes and everything evolves and security changes, surveillance techniques changes, eventually you're going to get a boss who is going to grow up in that life, and he's going to understand that the things that his predecessors did were highly more evolved than the ones today. And I think if you see organized crime go back to the roots of it all, I think you would see them a little bit more successful. But they haven't really shown that they've been able to adapt fully yet. We see other groups like Andrangheta and Yakuza, they keep the root of what they are always intact. And why they haven't totally been taken out like other crime families, well, there's a lot of reasons for that. But organized crime has always used labor unions as a tool to obtain monopoly power in certain markets and to give mob-run businesses an edge. They manipulate and supply the cost of labor. Organized crime can raise its competitors' costs. This is why they would do it. They force legitimate businesses to deal with mob-run companies, and they enforce price fixing or bid rigging, as we talk about, and other anti-competitive practices throughout the industry. In many labor racketeering schemes, legitimate businesses have willingly cooperated with organized crime and have derived benefits such as decreased labor costs, inflated prices, increased business in the market. Robert Rispo, who was an associate of the Buffalino crime family, whose boss was, we know, Russell Buffalino, participated in a nationwide labor racketeering enterprise that benefited a series of labor leasing companies, several Fortune 500 companies, the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, union officials, and La Cosa Nostra. And he had gone on record in saying, and this was from wiretaps, in order for the scheme to work across the country, you have to have the cooperation of the union that is involved, the company that is involved, and then our labor leasing company. It will be all three or it just doesn't work. So they have to have the labor union, They have to have the leasing company. They have to have everybody on board. Otherwise, none of it would work. Even if the number may seem, small relatively, like 70,000 labor organizations existing in the United States, many infiltrated unions are major locals embracing thousands of members, and they operate in a strategic commercial sectors in large urban and metropolitan areas. Influence over those locals enables organized crime to dominate the international unions and acquire a foothold in the marketplace. It enables them to position corrupt labor leaders who move in the shadows between legitimate and illegitimate businesses to gain access to the political process. So this is how political influence sort of plays out with organized crime. It's sort of hard to describe that today because it's a little bit different. Even though I think Eric Adams in New York City is the biggest criminal fuck that's ever existed, we look at people like Frank Costello for this sort of stuff. Through the domination of select labor unions, or especially in major areas, organized crime at various times has influenced a number of markets in construction, wholesale, retail, meat processing, trucking, garbage carting, and waterfront trade. And that type of control has enabled organized crime to determine who will do business, who to allocate territories to, how to set those prices, and how to decide when and where people will work, how long they will work, and they can even dictate the wages and benefits that come along with that. So it's total control. Millions and millions of workers' dues and benefits money have been siphoned off by organized crime throughout the history through outright embezzlement, or in more sophisticated sort of ways, such as loans of excessive fees paid to corrupt union and trust fund service providers. Workers can be denied the full benefit of their collective bargaining agreements when corrupt union officials trade their rights for payoffs and other advantages of mob-run businesses. For example, in Manhattan, through the mob's influence on construction activities, they've almost made the construction industry almost cartel-like because they control concrete. They can inflate construction costs. And even people of public and private building companies. Like, think of Donald Trump. Without the mob, he wouldn't have gotten a cut rate discount on concrete. So it's really, it's all encompassing. And what that really does is, it inflates rent, it inflates taxes and other charges. So we have the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, the Labor's International Union in North America, the Hotel Employees and Restaurant Employees International Union, and you have the Longshoremen's Association. So in the late 1950s, there was an investigation by the U.S. Senate Select Committee on Improper Activities and Labor Management Affairs, which was also known as the McClellan Committee. They really uncovered systematic racketeering in bakeries, butcher shops, carpentry unions, distillery workers, hotel and restaurant employees, operating engineers, the Teamsters, the textiles workers unions. Of the 58 organized crime figures arrested at the 1957 Appalachian Conference, more than 20 claimed involvement in labor or labor management relations. Those people included officials of the hotel and restaurant employee, officials of the Teamsters, as well as major mob figures as Joe Bonanno, Vito Genovese, Paul Castellano, and Carlo Gambino. And when Carlo Gambino was stopped by police, he told them he was a labor relations consultant. So traditional rackets would include raiding workers' benefit funds, entering into sweetheart labor deals with employers, exacting strike insurance payments from vulnerable businesses. And there are other schemes and stuff that went on, and more sophisticated versions of that. But really the full control of unions, you always hear the story of how controlling a union, controlling the ports, they could slow up the ports, they could speed up the ports, deliveries could be late, and all of that changes inflation. It changes the price. It changes the market value. And when they do that, it's not so much they're doing it because they know they can get more or get less, but if they're controlling the input and output, then people have to do what the fuck they say. And if people don't do what the fuck they say, then there's going to be an issue. And that's how you control politics, is through unions and stuff like that. So I hope you can at least understand somewhat where I'm sort of going with this. The commission also found that organized crime can use unions in 4 principal ways. The first way is that they can convert union resources, members' dues, union assets, or workers' benefit funds to its own use. Second, it can use unions to exact payoffs from businesses in the form of sweetheart contracts and strike insurance. Third, it can use the union as a way to influence the entire market. And the last way, may generate the same kind of payoffs from the sweetheart deal and strike insurance. So these rackets may be a part of the general market corruption scheme that they had going on. But organized crime can use that union as a mean to access, and they can also use it as a means of protection from the political and government process. So there are businesses that are actually fully controlled by organized crime, and they can provide legitimate fronts for criminal activities that can enable organized crime to eliminate competition and set prices in particular markets. In certain industries, there are, trade associations, which are groups of businesses conducting the same fucking trade, which have been compelled by the local market conditions to deal with organized crime influenced unions. Those associations can operate as cartels. Basically, they set the price, they allocate the market, and they decide who may and may not conduct business. So everything from shakedowns to bribes, here it is 101. Associations can function as instruments of control over industries in the same manner that unions are used to influence the industry. Some businesses are not influenced by organized crime, but nevertheless, even if they're not involved in organized crime, they find it beneficial to sort of make deals with the mob for a lot of different reasons. They can reduce their labor costs, which mean they'll save money. They'll have labor peace. They'll get higher profits. And that's the incentive for them getting involved. Sometimes it's not always, hey, Vito's going to come down here, break your fucking legs on the docks if you don't do this. If they can keep the labor costs down, they're promised no strikes. It's just like a well-oiled machine. So to look at it sort of is a bubble. Big-time corporations, they want to reduce their labor costs. And at the same time, they want to make sure if they're reducing labor costs, they're not going to have any problems on the docks. And they end up making deals with organized crime, labor leasing companies. And some businesses, like I said, there's good and bad with everything, have been victims of organized crime as well, making payoffs for providing other services in response to basically extortion demands or risking exclusion from a certain market. There's the abuse of financial resources. Labor racketeers have traditionally benefited from union financial resources through outright embezzlement or sophisticated schemes. The most successful schemes are the payment of excessive salaries benefiting organized crime-connected union officials to basically the plunder of the workers' health and pension funds. Think of Las Vegas. We've talked about this before, how they had to use Teamster funds to get the loan to open up casinos. This is an example of how the scheme works. They're taking the money out of pension funds. So if somebody tries to collect their pension and they've wiped it out, they've got nothing. But the mob has always been traditional at sort of doing this. Sort of a comparison of salaries paid to officers and officials of organized crime influence unions. What those salaries are paid to different officers and officials of illegitimate unions, and illustrates sort of the potential of how that racket works. Union officials in organized crime routinely pay themselves and their friends excessive salaries, fees, and commissions. Themselves and their family can receive an array of benefits and payments ranging from reimbursement for non-union related criminal defense fees to houses, cars, whatever it is. Former union leader Daniel Cunningham was found guilty of embezzling union funds while serving as a trustee of the Allied International Union Health and Welfare Fund. He gave no-show jobs to friends and family members. He dispersed approximately $38,000 in union and welfare fund checks to his wife, to his ex-wife, to his girlfriend, and then he would use union funds for personal travel expenses and merchandise. And during the 6 years that he was looting the union, he purchased $147,000 of municipal bonds and amassed a cash kitty of more than $190,000. So he's borrowing from the pension fund. And then on top of that, he's purchasing municipal bonds. So he's using money that's not his to purchase something that's going to make him even more money. Sort of another labor union racket that's used against specifically against a union is the diversion of worker benefit funds. Union benefit funds have, obviously over the last 40 years have grown significantly in size and scope, obviously since World War II. Benefit funds, it's more than 75,000 with cumulative assets of more than $51 billion. So there's a lot of money they can fucking raid. The funds cover pension, health, welfare benefits, and function as a private social security system for millions of retired, disabled, and needy workers. These funds also represent the enormous racketeering potential. Organized crime has a variety of schemes that divert monies right back to themselves. Benefit funds, they derive their assets primarily from the employers in amounts determined by the collective bargaining agreement. In theory, it's always nice to say in theory, benefit fund income is invested and the total assets are used to create benefit of the membership. It does not always work that way, but certain funds have been administered by corrupt trustees and executors who have paid themselves insane salaries and then billed for unnecessary and excessive administrative fees. The corrupt trustees also may draft governing bylaws to keep large cash reserves on hand. So if they control the laws, they control the rules, they can really do whatever the fuck they want. So that the disposition of the accumulating surplus is then accomplished through a variety of other schemes. Payments can be made to various entities or fictitious services, i.e. fronts, for the purchase of goods solely intended for the use of the racketeers. Money gained has been used to finance speculative ventures of organized crime, i.e. casinos. They can favor insiders, tend to have a little difficulty in securing loans. Well, you don't have a problem securing a fucking loan now because they'll use that to do it. Alan Glick, we mentioned Las Vegas. Alan Glick received $62 million from the Teamsters Central States Pension Fund within 9 days of his application, and he did not submit a personal financial statement of saying what he had, what he was worth. If you're going to borrow, you have to show collateral. But Alan Glick, as we know, was the front guy for the mob out in Vegas. With that money, Glick purchased the Recrian Corporation, which owned the Stardust and the Fremont Casino out in Las Vegas. Glick held the legal ownership of the casinos until the Nevada Gaming Commission ordered him to sell his interests because of slot machine skimming schemes. On September 30th of 1983, a federal grand jury in Kansas City returned an indictment against 15 individuals, including high officials of organized crime families in Chicago, Joe Iuppa, John Cerrone, Joey the Clown Lombardo, in Kansas City, Carl DeLuna, Carl Savella, Peter Tamburello, and in Milwaukee, Frank Ballesteri. So in essence, the indictment alleged that Glick was the frontman for organized crime officials who had arranged for Glick to obtain the loans from the Central States Pension Fund in order to purchase the casinos. Thereafter, organized crime exercised influence over that operation and management of the casinos and skimmed over $1 million from those casino winnings. And Jimmy Hoffa, who controlled the Teamsters, was very active in a lot of that kind of stuff in the early days. So when benefit funds are paid out on behalf of workers, the payout sometimes goes to the insurance companies and prepaid health plans. Those companies can charge inflated fees and bill for non-existent commissions and services rendered. In some cases, professional asset managers, fund administrators, insurance providers, doctors, dentists, lawyers, and accountants have fronted for organized crime and its manipulation of union benefit funds. In some other cases, the service provider is just a corporate shell that gives organized crime the means to benefit from the fund money stolen from the union. So by those sort of devices, law enforcement can't do shit. They can't trace the money. They can't trace the diverted funds. And the union beneficiaries pay unnecessary and excessive administrative fees to the service providers, and the benefits promised in the membership are not available when union members attempt to draw upon them. So in other words, you go to use your benefits, you can't use them because they're non-existent. The labor union, there was a sort of a case study, and it showed that in one particular situation, an administrator associated with members of the Chicago organized crime family siphoned off 68% of the money paid for dental care and administrative costs. It just goes to show that it's all encompassing. It's all encompassing. Now, I know this is a lot of jargon, and you guys are probably going, Jesus Christ, when are we going to get to the simplified shit of the big names? And we're going to. Probably not today, because I'm going to go for a couple more minutes. I'm just looking ahead at my list just to show you how things work. So the sweetheart contracts, right? And basically that's a deal based on labor management collusion, whereby the employer is permitted to violate or sidestep the collective bargaining provisions. In specific cases, the underlying crime may be to either bribe or to extort, but the economic basis of all sweetheart deals is the price of labor. In return for a payoff, the corrupt union official, the employer, can use fewer workers, pay them less money, pay less insurance, assign and discharge them, do whatever the fuck they want. As an example of this, an employer can make illegal payments to a union representative in return for the privilege of using non-union labor, or for the union's promise not to organize workers within its jurisdiction. So if I want to do something and I don't want to use non-union labor, they will make sure that the people that are in the union don't strike and don't go crazy and don't stand out there with signs calling people fucking scabs. So you're controlling it. I can't imagine what that would cost. But a more sophisticated sort of arrangement is sort of where the employer chooses the union representatives of whom he will negotiate with, rather than to deal with officials selected by the employees. The consequences of that can be super beneficial to the employer and to the corrupt union officer. It's a lesson that has not been lost on organized crime, because there was an intercepted conversation between Sam the plumber DeCavalcante, head of the DeCavalcante crime family, and another member by the name of Gaetano Corky Vastola, and an associate, Joseph Whitey Donzo. And this is what it illustrates. Vastola, well, and this is verbatim what they were talking about on a wiretap. Vastola says, well, I'm going to make the score this way. When I sit down with the boss, I tell him how much it's going to cost him in welfare, hospitalization, and all of that. Say a plant with 260 people will cost them $4,000 a month. It's just for hospitalization. So altogether, I make packages out of it. I'll say it's going to cost $100,000 a year. Let's cut it in half and forget about it and walk away. I show them first what it's going to cost, then how much I'm going to save him by walking away. DeCavalcante, well, you have to organize the plant so nobody else walks in there. Then you wind up with the dues every month. That's $3,000 a month. You could do that? Danzo, sure. He could give a solid contract for 3 years and he won't get hurt. DeCavalcante, then you get a pay every year. So in some instances, management will collude with corrupt union officials, and they will use those sweetheart deals to keep out legitimate and unwanted unions. So if a union's not corrupt, they don't want them there because they're scamming, they're doing all kinds of stuff. This is a way to keep them the fuck out. During an organizational drive, an employer can arrange for a rival organized crime-dominated union to be brought in, which can be expected to be, a little bit more understanding of the employer's problems. So if you bring in a non-mafia related union, that union may not see what this other guy wants. Whereas typically mob-run unions are more bendable. They're more agreeable. They're more understanding. Everything's for a kickback. Like we mentioned earlier before, Daniel Cunningham. He was the former president of the Allied International Union of Security Guards and Special Police, who got convicted of racketeering offenses in 1982. And he netted thousands of dollars from entering into so-called desk drawer contracts with employers. And he explained in his testimony to the commission, an umbrella or a desk drawer contract is a contract that the employer of a particular company would call the union and say that he would like to place his people under a union, and he would like a favorable contract. And generally, a contract would be drawn up, and in most cases, with the terms that the employer wanted, and it would never be implemented. It would just sit in a file or a drawer somewhere until at such time as the employees would either look for a union to represent them, or some union would come around and start organizing. And at that time, the employer would pull out this contract and say, I'm already represented by a union. So in effect, it would be a bar from the union coming in to organize them because the people were already represented. So in effect, an employer would pick up a considerable amount of time without having to pay a union benefits, and he would still be covered by that contract. So cheap labor, obviously is the universal desire in a market economy. It's just the way it's always been. And so collusion between labor and management in the form of sweetheart deals it really seems to be concentrated in industries where labor costs are really the competitive factor. Sweetheart deals tend to really flourish more so in the construction area, the trucking area, the garment industry, where differences between union wages and non-union labor rates provide an incentive. So everything's about cutting costs, and wherever you can cut, you can pocket. Then there's what we call strike insurance. There are payments that are known as strike insurance, and corrupt union officials typically extort money from management in return for promises to keep labor peace. We've talked about this before. In 1958, the McClellan Committee hearings revealed that in the building trades, in the garment trades, in the trucking industries, that was the big practice. Other businesses have been, victims of that particular labor racket. For example, May 15th of 1980, Douglas LaChance, who was then the president of the Independent Newspaper and Mail Deliveries Union of New York, was convicted of racketeering, extortion, and receiving improper payments and income tax evasion. LaChance received more than $330,000 from wholesale deliverers to ensure labor peace. Just imagine that. If you're a boss or you're a president of a union, you can say, if you don't fucking pay me money, we're going to create union problems for you. Listen, I know I've got a criminal shady past, like some people that do this kind of stuff. To me, that's like magic. You're going to get $330,000 just to tell a motherfucker you either pay me this or you're going to have all kinds of union problems. That's magic. I'm sorry. It's just magic to me. But like I said, LaChance received more than $330,000 from wholesale deliverers to ensure labor peace, to sign contracts, to lay off workers, and distribute interim papers during a strike. Of that amount, more than $85,000 came from a wholesaler who employed non-union drivers. So he doesn't have non-union drivers. Because he doesn't have non-union drivers, the guy says to him, okay, I tell you what, you cut me back a kickback of what you're getting, and I'll make sure other unions don't fuck with you. I'll make sure there's no strikes. I'll make sure that union workers don't go after your non-union workers. So there you go. That's how easy that it works. So there's different varying degrees of expertise and sophistication when it comes to labor union. Even with strike insurance, they're often camouflaged among countless checkbook transactions of the victim's business. So a common way is what they call the ghost employee, usually a crony of a racketeer who does little or no work, i.e. no-show job, but he receives money from several union or management payrolls. For example, years ago, John Ferracata, who was a made guy in the Chicago outfit, was listed as a business agent or organizer in the Laborers Local 8. In testimony taken by this commission, Ferracata could not describe the details of anything he did for the union. He did not know the substance of the terms in the union's collective bargaining agreement, nor could he name any management employees or union stewards. Strike insurance payments are also disguised as advertising revenue paid to union's journal or contributions to a union's annual dinner dance. A Teamsters local here in New York City, for example, sponsors an annual dinner to which employees of the members are invited. In some cases, racketeers have asked for checks payable to their labor relation firms. So while we talk about labor relations and strikes and et cetera, the potential to extort, and I think we've already shown how easy it is to extort somebody through strike insurance is really works where costs are very serious business. And I think that I'm just looking forward on this list here of things I wanted to mention. A part of the reason why that works so well is that employers just can't survive a strike. They can't survive a strike because it backs up their business. Let's see. So construction, work, it happens in stages, right? First, the site is, cleared and it's excavated. Then the foundation is laid and then the building begins. Successful venture requires coordination and timely delivery of supplies so that each group of workers can successfully take their place at the site and do their job. But in most circumstances where organized crime controls that, the union is the one that's responsible for delivering supplies and performing the work. And it has a massive, powerful hold over the entire industry. Companies reluctant to do business with organized crime will be coerced into participating through labor troubles. Companies that cooperate with organized crime often get rewarded with benefits such as the use of non-union labor, which drives costs down, saves them money, payments below the union scale, Donald Trump, or merely the assurance that supplies are going to be delivered when needed. Organized crime has always focused on those unions that control choke points to any construction job. For example, an IBT local in New York, which delivers building supplies to construction sites. So, New York construction businesses cooperating with organized crime have essentially, and think of the Concrete Club here for a second, have formed a cartel. And the union is the enforcing agent of that cartel. General contractors are told what suppliers they're going to use and who their subcontractors are going to be. If a contractor doesn't want to do that, doesn't want to comply, he's either never going to get the job, having been purposely underbid by the operating companies, or he will get the job but never be able to complete it. So it just shows you what they can do. Construction contractors have told committee representatives that they cannot simply go into the New York market because they're underbid and cannot get work done. So bid rigging. If you want the job, you're going to slide a little cash over this way. We're going to make sure everything goes smooth. We're going to get you low non-union wages. We're going to make sure you save a little money. But if you fuck with us, we'll make sure your workers never show up. We'll make sure that your rebar never shows up on site. That's just how they control everything. So, organized crime controls everything construction-wise. It's like, think of it in terms like this. Organized crime uses unions, and they use that influence really completely in the construction industry. Laborers do the initial cleaning of the site, right? The clearing of the site, and a job that precedes really everything else. And in a construction business where time is like really a big deal, a delay can end the project before it even begins. Laborers are also a source of labor that can be used to substitute for skilled trades. And what that does is it basically undercuts legitimate locals and they reward cooperating companies who, they'll provide cheaper workers, and there's always, readily available help. When organized crime influences the laborers, they influence the job. And so the typically, as we see, the mob's construction industry practices are really just, they never really change. So I'm going to give you a case thing. In late February of 1985, a federal grand jury in Manhattan returned what became known as the Commission Indictment. The indictment identifies 5 of the named defendants as head of the Lucchese, Gambino, Genovese, and Colombo and Bonanno crime families headquartered in New York City, and as members of the commission, which allegedly serves the counsel for La Cosa Nostra families worldwide. The indictment states that the commission established and carried out various joint ventures between and among Cosa Nostra families, including a joint venture to dominate certain concrete contractors in New York City. The indictment, obviously, you guys know what we're talking about here. The indictment charges that the commission conducted the joint venture by establishing a club of contractors. The club allegedly allocated all contracts to pour concrete having a value exceeding $2 million, controlled contractors by threatening labor and cement supply companies, threatened them with problems, and received payoffs amounting to 2 to 5% to 10% of the contracts exceeding $2 million for participating in those concrete contractor companies. And what ended up happening as a result, obviously the commission case, but New York State also filed civil action under the federal antitrust laws against some of these defendants. The complaint stated that the defendants conspired to allocate major New York City public and private concrete construction work through a system of complementary and collusive bidding. It further charges that the defendants conspired to exclude other concrete subcontractors from competing by threatening them with labor and ready-mix concrete supply problems. 3 of the companies named in the New York State antitrust complaint are also identified in the federal racketeering indictment as businesses that paid kickbacks to representatives of the commission. So it's not just construction. And then you move on to like the wholesale meat industry. Paul Castellano especially was good at this. He controlled a lot of the New York wholesale and retail meat and poultry business by traditional labor racketeering schemes, such as ensuring union trouble for uncooperative businesses and providing cheap labor for its allies. These techniques prove that it would influence competitors to get on board or get lost. The continued expansion of organized crime into legitimate meat and poultry business has been incredibly swift, and its profits and earnings are so high that one company in which a La Cosa Nostra family member, Peter Castellano Sr., is a sales manager, and its shares publicly traded on the national stock market. So one of the things, I wanted to mention really quick, and one thing we're going to talk about in future shows, is organized crime families that start in the rackets, but then through sheer profits legitimize themselves. And that's the whole basis for organized crime, is to legitimize yourself so future generations don't have to struggle. Profaci olive oil turned into Cola Vita. Cola Vita is one of the biggest oil companies in the world. Paul Castellano's children, his grandchildren, control the meat products, and they also control concrete all over Staten Island. So that's the whole purpose of organized crime, is to ensure that your future does not have to work or do things that you had to do. But we'll get into that on another show. Let's see. Frank Perdue. We've talked about this before. We're almost done for this week. Frank Perdue, the chicken producer, recognized that there were competitive aspects of the New York meat and poultry market. Perdue, who was a supplier, obviously we know, of Perdue Chicken. He was a supplier of his chicken to Quarex Industries, and considers the relationship a matter of business and just the bottom line. Frank Perdue said, under questioning, "I decided that if I could be protected, that I could get my share of Peter Castellano's business. But he had to give us a letter of credit. Like, he has to give us all the other shippers who ship him, so the shipper is protected. Then if he doesn't give me a problem, harassment, canceling or things like that, that a guy like Fancy would do. I don't really understand what he's sort of meaning here, but I have no problem dealing with him. I know what he is, but I have my money. He unloads my trucks on time. We have no problems. He pays his bills. Purdue, like many other guys, also believed that organized crime connections can help a company having trouble with its workers. We've talked about this before. When he faced a mounting labor problem in Accomack, Virginia, Purdue sought help from Paul Castellano, head of the Gambino crime family. Question: why did you go to Paul Castellano Sr.? Answer: I don't know. I just thought, they have long tentacles, shall we say. And I figured he may be able to help me. Question: when you say they have long tentacles as an organized crime figure, is that what you mean? Answer: yeah, mafia and the mob. So what he's saying is that he was about to have a huge labor issue and he needed it to be solved. And he had to find a way desperately to get that solved. And how did he do it? By using the mob. So the mob has always had its tentacles and everything anyway, but it's an ebb and flow. You scratch my back, I scratch yours. Let's see what else we have. I think I'm going to save this part for last week. So when we come back next week, and I know this is a lot of stuff to kind of absorb, we're going to actually find out how the docks are spread out in New York, how the ports work, who is in charge of what and why. We're going to talk about how marketplace corruption sort of begins. We've got some interesting wiretaps with Sal Avellino, Thomas Ronga, where they pretty much lay out how things work. And it's going to be interesting. I know it's not the most exciting thing in the world, but we're also going to really look at how historically the mob has used unions to gain political power. Because in any good business, you have to have power, and you can't just, we talk all the time about, well, did this one learn how to corrupt politicians this way or that way? Did they learn it from this guy or that guy? A lot of it is just by watching. And we're also going to bring up some stuff on the docks and some historical aspects. Like I said, it's probably not the most exciting thing in the world you've ever heard, but if you ever wanted to learn or to understand how the mob functions, how they take money, it sounds daunting, to say the least. It sounds like, holy shit, this is just too far wide reaching for me. There's too much going on. I hope I was able to dummy it down enough for even myself. But it just shows the power that they have or had. And that's the big thing. 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. They controlled everything. Now you may be able to understand, at least on a little different level, how Carlo Gambino was able to control the Eastern Seaboard. Saying he controls the Eastern Seaboard and not understanding how he was able to accomplish that, or not to understand everything that's involved in that, it's very, it's sophisticated, but I think it's more easily understood than maybe I'm explaining it. We're also going to talk about Anthony Scotto a lot. Because he was a powerhouse on the waterfront, and we're going to show you how he was able to bend a lot of people at their will without having to lift a finger. Because if you are somebody that controls the docks, I would almost venture a guess to say you almost have as much power as a mob boss itself. Straight up. The things that Anthony Scotto allegedly had done, we'll talk about, but we're also going to talk about the sheer power that he had. I told you guys a story a long time ago, and I'm going to end with this. I told you guys a story a long time ago that I knew the president of the ILA in Virginia, okay? And keep in mind, this guy's still alive. He's got to be 84 or 85 now. And he told me, and he lost the position, okay? And maybe next week I'll get into the story of why he lost his position. But he used to say to me all the time, that guy, Carlo Gambini, he didn't call him Gambino, he called him Gambini. He goes, that guy could push buttons and shut everything down. He could shut everything down. And this guy's job, his name was Gary, his job was to ensure everything just kept moving. Just kept moving. He knew he knew what things came in shipping containers were going to be moved to New York. If it was illegal substances, he would know. It just, maybe next week we'll open with that and I'll explain to you exactly what he told me, because there is some insane shit that I don't think a lot of people know goes on. And it should be a surprise to no one that a lot of drugs come in through shipping containers that are never caught. And if they can control the ports, if they can control the people, they can control the unions, if they can control every single facet, maybe out of the gate they get caught once, twice a year. But just the sheer amount of stuff that was coming in, the stuff that they were able to do, was just crazy. It's bigger than I think anybody would ever know. So that's going to be it for this week. We will come back next week with an all new show. We'll talk more about labor racketeering. It will not be nearly as terminology driven. It'll be more, let's pull out names, faces that we know and talk about their position and where they got. But it all comes down really at the end of the day is there is a reason why during World War II, the U.S. Navy and the government went to the Mafia to protect the ports, which included the docks, because the government knew the Mafia controlled everything. Everything. So, like I said, it should be a shock to nobody that the Mafia has had that sort of control over the docks and everything else. Also, I would encourage all of you to go to Google and type in Newark, New Jersey, New York City, fighting over ports. Read those articles. That's going to give you some really good insight. They're both blaming each other for union corruption. They're blaming each other for the Mafia. New Jersey wants to bring in police. New York City says, no, the fuck you're not. Because they wanted police to come in and sort of police the ports to make sure there wasn't corruption going on. But they're threatening to sue each other because there was a 100-year deal they signed like forever and a day ago. And now New Jersey's suing them saying they want the fuck out. They're both blaming each other. It's hilarious. It really is hilarious to read. But type that in on Google. That might give you a better understanding of sort of where we're going to go. But with this, like I said, next week, less terminology and more simplified. And I think I'll give you some examples that'll include bid rigging and some stuff like that, just to give you sort of like a dummy sheet of how it works. But the most important thing I wanted you to get out of this is how it functions, how they divert money, how they do things. Now, take away all of that. We always talk, about kicking up and how much money's going to be kicked up here, there, and everywhere, right? You may have 10 or 12 guys, right, that are, let's say, active in narcotics, construction, and they're making the bulk of the money. But now that I put you sort of on the top of the clouds looking down on it, and you see what union corruption looks like, does it surprise you that they were making $400 and $500 million a year now? Because that's where the real money is. The money is in unions. When you lose unions, you are losing power. That's why I've always said, the minute you lose unions, if you're no longer involved in union corruption, what kind of money are you making? All right, you got two guys selling drugs. All right, but that's still not a lot of money. Unions are everything. If you do not control them, you have no power. Through those unions comes the corrupt power of city council, of legislators. That is where your true power fucking comes from. And Frank Costello knew it. Gambino knew it. But is that what's going on today? And that's the difference. So when people say, oh, well, the mob is dead in comparison, I would tend to agree with that in theory of, yes, they don't have the massive corruption that they used to have, but that doesn't mean they're non-existent. But yeah, is the heyday gone? Of course it is. But like I told you, everything evolves, but always reverts. The mob may not be killing anybody today. 2 or 3 years from now, it's only going to take a couple of things to set some chain of events off. And I think, well, okay, I know in a certain particular couple of areas in the United States, it's only going to take 1 or 2 events here or there to create a bunch of fucking shooting. I'm telling you. I'm telling you, it will not take much. A lot of people like to say, well, they wouldn't do that today because it's too many eyes. Bullshit. You fuck a guy out of his money, you're going to see somebody get killed. You see a guy who's encroaching on other people's turf and doesn't give a fuck about them and badmouths them behind their back. It takes one guy to end up going to jail to create a schism in the hierarchy, and you're going to see some shit. I'm telling you. That's just the way it is. Anyway, we'll be back next week with an all-new show. I hope you enjoyed this. I'm sorry if it was too, I don't know. I don't know the fucking words for it. Maybe it was just too medical. I don't know. I don't know if that's the right word for it. But if you did enjoy the show, please do me a solid. Just let me know. And if there was anything you need clarification on, reach out to mobtalkradioshow@gmail.com and let me know. I was hoping that this would go over easy. Like I said, when I'm talking about it, I already, for the most part, understood all of this. So it's like second nature to me. But to you, it may not be. So I'm hoping that it was clear enough for you. And if it wasn't, reach out to me via email and I'll walk you through it and I'll explain it in better details. And that's probably how I'm going to open next week when we talk more about labor unions and stuff like that is I'll dummy it down really, really easily. That way you can kind of maybe understand it a little bit better. Maybe I wasn't clear enough. Anyway, have a great weekend, everybody. We'll see everybody next week.
This morning